All right, thanks, Colleen. And thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here today. I bet you a number of you are on spring break right now. I know I am. In fact, I just came in from the garden. So thank you for investing in this time. I know you probably signed up for Google Meet for distance learning, but over the weekend I did a little bit of reading. And what I found was, or something that struck me was that distance learning really doesn't capture where we're at. So distance learning to me, when we think about that, we're thinking about like something that's prescribed, something that's deliberate, something that's strategic. I think more about the moment that we're in is more about emergency remote learning. And I picked that up from George Couros and AJ Giuliani, and they're going with this phrase, and I think it captures better what we are doing now. And I just want to thank you so much for your work that you're doing as educators right now. It's such a fraught time, but I've been so inspired, and so I've just been so amazed at what educators have stood up and are standing in to do right now in this circumstance. I'm really hopeful that today's presentation is going to further equip you as you go into this space, this new space of providing remote learning for our students. All right, so our objectives for today. Our objectives are that participants will learn how to use Google Meet for synchronous classroom meetings. In addition, there will be some virtual classroom facilitation strategies that will be discussed. And I want to draw your attention to the bottom left corner of most of the slides. If you haven't got it already, that is the link to today's slideshow, bit.ly/CLS-GM. So feel free to go in there. In fact, I encourage you to go in there because there's going to be some resources in here that you can use that will hopefully equip you, again, on your journey with using Google Meet. And I want to point out an interesting irony right now, right? So here we are in a Zoom meeting, but we're talking about Google Meet. But I think we can do that just fine. All right, so right up front, here are some helpful resources for you. There are some guidelines in text and a video tutorial that were put together by one of my colleagues in the Salinas Union High School District. So thanks to Jonathan Green, if you're out there. And also one of my coworker, or someone I know at Google, our liaison at Google, TD, has also provided some information here too. So anywhere where you see something underlined on one of the slides in the presentation, that will denote a link. And so please use that to check out those resources. Just a note about the video tutorial. It's about 10 minutes long. The first 30 seconds are a little bit, there's a little bit of background noise, but after that it cleans up. And it does a nice job of going through the functionality of Google Meet. All right, and so just a couple of vocabulary words up front. So today we're focusing on a tool that you can use for synchronous learning. But as we know right now, we're also doing asynchronous learning, right? So synchronous refers to things that happen in real time, kind of like, well, it is exactly like our classrooms where we're doing teaching our students in real time. We also have synchronous tools now that enable us to do teaching in real time with our students online. And of course, we're also doing asynchronous instruction and asynchronous learning activities where we do things like post learning activities on Google Classroom, and then our students follow those directions and they go through it. Today, we're going to be focusing on the left side of this T-chart, on the synchronous side, on a tool that will equip you to do synchronous instruction. All right, here are my district, like a lot of yours, probably like all of yours, has been on this journey of trying to set up the right structure for distance learning or for remote learning. And so part of that has been trying to come around trying to establish some norms and guidelines. And so this is a list that we've come up with. It's not completely comprehensive, and you might have some other ideas. And in a moment, in fact, I'm going to ask that you reflect on what you think are appropriate norms and guidelines for teachers and students. But what we're going to do right now is we're just going to pause. We're going to take 90 seconds, and I'm going to start my timer. And I'd just like you to look through this list and think about whether or not those norms and guidelines are applicable to your particular district. And like I said, we'll come back and we'll do a little reflecting after we look at these norms and guidelines and then some students' norms and guidelines. So 90 seconds. So I'm going to start a timer and we'll come back. Okay, and another 10 seconds. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, next we're going to take about 30 seconds. The student list and the student guidelines is a little bit shorter. And again, be prepared to do some sharing out about what resonates from you, what resonates with you from this list, or if you have some other norms and guidelines that you'd like to suggest. All right, so here are some synchronous meeting norms and guidelines for students. So go ahead and read through this list. We'll take about 30 seconds with this one. Okay, another 5 seconds. Okay, 0, 1. All right, some things that jump out at me on these two lists. First of all, on the student side, I think it's, first of all, for sure, just like you would when you would begin the year, right? You always want to start with norms. And as teachers know, as teachers, we have to constantly circle back to those norms. But when we go into this online space, we're also going to want to have some norms and guidelines as well. And I like to make sure that always, for me, the number one thing is to have a positive attitude. But some other things that I think are important here is I think we need to empower and equip our students to be able to articulate themselves either in written form or verbally online. And that's why you see the link here where it says use positive language in all online conversations. And in fact, I've dropped in a link to the bottom. This actually comes from a book by Catherine Matson called Digital Citizenship in Action, and we've adapted that for our district. So do feel free to check that out. And this is a great time to reinforce how we should be articulating and how we should be speaking and writing online. And of course, I think it's also important that we remind ourselves and remind our students to make sure that we're eliminating the distractions that are behind us. So if anything is inappropriate for the learning activities that are taking place, that's behind me, those things need to be taken down. In addition to that, we as educators and also students should be looking across our browser and checking our tabs to make sure that our tabs are appropriate, that we've got up, that any extensions that we have, anything that's visible that the students might be seeing if we're sharing our screen needs to be checked in advance. And then in our district, we're moving forward with the idea that only teachers can host classroom meetings. That's not to preclude students from meeting if they need to collaborate outside of that time, but only teachers can host whole classroom meetings. And then one that I really like, and I think that's really important, and that I actually have in my, when we meet regularly with my students, is that in the event of a technology problem, carry on with the learning activity as best you can. I'm sure across all the teachers that are implementing distance learning right now and moving forward with the remainder of the school year, technology things are bound to happen. In fact, in my district, I was just talking with one of my colleagues, and there was a power outage. There was a power outage at his apartment, and so he was in the midst of presenting to his students. And so he was saying how he would have liked to have reminded his students in advance that if there is a technology problem, and invariably there will be at some point, whether it's with you or with somebody else, the students need to be guided to carry on with the learning activity as best they can. And that might mean they know in advance that, like go back to Google Classroom, pull up the documents, pick up where we left off on your own, or maybe it's go to the textbook, or maybe it's to pick up a book and start reading, something like that. All right, so now is going to be a time for you to reflect on some of these norms and guidelines. Perhaps you have another one to suggest, or perhaps something that you saw here resonated with you and you'd like to expound on that. So what I'm going to invite you to do now is in the chat, please respond to this following prompt. And we'll take about 90 seconds for this. What is an online meeting norm for students and/or teachers you think is important? So please, we'll take a minute for this. So please take a minute and put that in the chat. Yeah, quiet meeting space. Thank you, Lupe. That's great. Listen to learn. Good. Start with routine. Thank you. Excellent. Participate. Good. I really like what I'm seeing. Be attentive. Yeah. Be focused. Mixing this home and work. Yeah, absolutely. Be positive. Thank you. Be patient. Yeah, absolutely. Wow, lots of good stuff. Wow, this is really, really powerful crowdsourcing right now. Good academic language. Yeah, those language frames, I think we'll get at that academic language. Good to have a specific focus. Stay on task. Yeah. Thank you. Be energetic. Very good. And listen. Good. Be professional. Good. Another 20 or so seconds. Excellent. Yeah, follow a schedule. That's been another area that we've been working on, is trying to generate the best schedule for our schools, or create the best schedule. Have an agenda. Good. Yeah, protocols for Google Classroom. There is a Google Classroom. So whoever dropped that Google Classroom comment in, there's a Google Classroom coming up on Thursday. Google Classroom for distance learning, I think it is. All right, we're going to close this off. Feel free to keep adding these in as we continue, but I'm going to continue on with the presentation now. Excellent. Nice work, everybody. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about teacher setup, and this is really agnostic of whether you use Google Meet, but in any setting, right, you want to make sure that your lighting is good. And notice too that this word is underlined here, so that denotes a link. So do check that out. That was actually the document that you'll pull up from there will show nice 3-point lighting and an ideal setup. It just so happens, like the lighting of the room I'm in, I've got a window over here that's giving me some sun this way that lights up one side of my face. Ideally, I would have another light source over here, but just so happens I share this office with my wife, who's also a teacher, and this is the best we could do. Webcam, I think I want to recommend that you keep your webcam on, and let's talk about that for a moment. We're in this incredible time of disconnect. And so this is one way that we can start to bring back the connections that we have with our students. And I know it's a little bit awkward at first, like to see yourself and actually to hear yourself when you're speaking. Like, it's kind of odd right now. I'm speaking to this monitor. I know you're all out there, but I'm speaking to a monitor. But in order to reestablish that connection with our kids as best we can in the circumstance that we're in, I'm going to encourage you to turn your webcam on. Also, I'm going to encourage you to keep it at eye level or a little bit higher. In addition to that, try to look at the camera that's on your monitor. Now, I put this in red because this is a growth area for me. I have a tendency to look at the monitor in front of me instead of looking at the camera. So I'm looking right now at the camera to make sure, and I'm going to try to do that to make sure I do that for the rest of this presentation. Also, there's another link right here called Grid View. I want you to check that out. This is an add-on within the Google, from the Google Chrome web store. If you click on that and you add that extension, it's going to allow you to replicate that grid of all participants. Without that, you're going to have just some of your participants showing, or some of your students showing up on one side of your screen. So do check out the grid view. And then also I'm going to encourage you to create 2 or more windows. And here's what I mean by that. So on my screen right now, I've got what I'm presenting, which is my Google slide deck or my Google presentation. And on the other side, I've got, in this case, it's Zoom. When I'm teaching or when I'm presenting to teachers in my district, it's my Google Meet window. So I've got 2 windows open. So what that looks like is I open up my browser, I open up my presentation, and then in another tab, I open up another tab, and I go to meet.google.com, I open that, and then I drag it out so I have 2 windows showing. And it just helps me, it helps me move forward with my presentation. All right, so setting up your Google Meet is pretty straightforward. You go to meet.google.com, and that's one way to set it up. But I think as teachers with students, I think one of the best ways to do this is to go to Google Calendar, start a calendar invite, and I'll show you what this looks like in a moment. And then roster your Google Classroom. I think many of us as educators are using Google Classroom right now. And right now in this moment, Google Classroom is super powerful and super important to use. And I think it's really wise for CLS to be conducting a Google Classroom training directly following this. And that will be again on Thursday. But so what you want to do in Google Classroom, or what you were going to take from Google Classroom is the name of the class. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So it's like a 3-step process. So the first thing you want to do is you go to your calendar. And if we need to, if there's some demand for this, I'll model this after this, or I'll model this if it's something that's going to be chosen. But you're going to go to Google Calendar. You're going to put in the title for whatever you want your class meeting to be called. You'll put the time in. Secondly, you'll put in the name of your Google Classroom. And then once you have the name of your Google Classroom, you'll be able to populate that in where it says guests. And like I said, it's really nice that that shows up, and that will automatically have all your students in it as well. And then the third thing, and very importantly, is you want to add conferencing. And this is where you add a Hangouts meet. All right, so starting a Google Meet, you'd start that from Google Calendar, go to meet.google.com. And I think what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to pause, and I'm going to demonstrate that, how to do that within Google Calendar. So what I would do is you should see me opening up another tab now. I'm going to go to my calendar, calendar.google.com. And then once there, I'm going to select the date where my class is meeting. And let's just say it's going to meet on Saturday the 11th. And I'm going to double click in that space. I'll put a title. So period 1. I'll give it the appropriate time. So let's say 10 to 11. And then secondly, this is where I would come in, and this is where I could put my class. So I'm going to do period 1. Let's see if I can find it here. There it is. There's my Google Classroom. So I'm going to pull that in. And then of course I want to add conferencing. So now that I've got that, notice I have this Hangouts Meet. I can join it straight away from here if I want, if it's happening imminently, or I can come back later to my calendar and it'll be there. All right, so that's starting a Google Meet. All right, so also when you start, there's some things you want to remember. Again, it's kind of odd, right? We're used to being with our students in a room with all the faces out there, and we're used to interacting live, right? So you're going to want to ask things like simple things like, do you hear me? Can you see my screen? And can you see me or my screen? And students can go like this. You can teach them to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down for something like that, possibly. Or you could have them use the chat. Yes, we hear you. Yes, you can see my screen. And that just gives you as the instructor a little bit more reassurance, like things are progressing as they should. Another thing you want to do, and this is really important, is just to check in with everybody. How is everybody doing today? Again, you're not going to be having that face-to-face interaction. You're not going to be able to be so, you're not going to be able to have that connection, that live connection that you normally would have with the students. Like, when they come into your classroom and you can tell, like at that very moment, like how their day is going. So you're going to want them to somehow let you know, right? So you can check in with them, and then if possible, if necessary, you're going to want to follow up with kids that aren't doing well. So you could, again, using the thumbs, right? You could say, how's everyone? Thumb up for feeling great, just okay, and not so great. And of course, if you have some students that are doing this, you're going to want to take note of that and come back to that. And I want to stop here for a moment. I want to talk a little bit about just the importance of I know a lot of us have already started, but of starting and circling back to the socio-emotional aspect of our students, checking in with them, making sure they're okay. In addition to this being a difficult time for us and a traumatic time for us and dramatic, and all that goes into this crisis that we're dealing with, students are clearly also feeling this as well. And so to that end, doing things like checking in, simple things like, how is everyone? Perhaps waiting to go on your content, waiting to deliver your content until after you've done some socio-emotional pieces, I think is really important. And then at this point too, I want to call attention to something else that CLS is providing, and I think that's next Thursday. They're going to be doing another webinar on it's going to be called Dealing with the New Normal, Navigating the Overwhelm of Change. And I think Colleen will put something she's going to put something into the chat to let you know about that. So that would be definitely something to check in or check out. All right, so teaching in Google Meet, again, we've already talked about showing yourself and the importance of that. To the extent to where it makes sense, sometimes it's helpful to have a moderator. And you might have like a classroom aide that could do that, or you have a student that you can trust with that responsibility. If you do, and if you have more than one, perhaps you can rotate that responsibility. And what that means and what that moderator would do is they'd be checking the chat. If you need to stop, if the moderator sees any questions that keep showing up repeatedly, the moderator would be the one to alert the teacher that, hey, we need to stop here and check in. Perhaps this is, I've used moderators for this purpose too. Like I'll be demonstrating on my screen and I think I'm on my screen, but it turns out I'm on another screen. And the moderator would then step in and say, hey, you know, Mr. Appel, you need to be on the correct screen. So do think about that. And I think especially getting started with these synchronous learning activities, it's hard enough to manage the chat, the Q&A, and also what you're trying to model or present. So having another set of eyes to help monitor with those things is very helpful. Also, I want to encourage you to do just that, to model. And within Google Meet, and I'm going to show you where this is in a moment, to use the screen share feature. And that's going to allow you to, you know, we know as teachers, right, one of the very powerful ways we can get students to understand the content that we're presenting is to, and the strategies that we're teaching them about, is to model what we want them to do in advance. And the screen share feature for that, the screen share feature within Google Meet certainly makes that available to us. In addition to that, we want to pause. And we want to do checks for understanding. So often I think as teachers, or for years for teachers, we've been taught this model of 10-2-2, right? 10 minutes of teacher talk, 2 minutes of processing, and 2 minutes of student talk. Well, clearly now in this new paradigm of online learning, it's going to be a little bit different. So I'm suggesting, and this isn't research-based, but this is just something that makes sense to me right now, is do something not necessarily go for the full 10 minutes, but to go for 5 minutes or 7 minutes. And then just be very deliberate and strategic in planning in pauses, whether they be 1 minute or 2 minute or 90 seconds or whatever makes sense. To do that, you can certainly use the chat. You can use tools like Slido. In a moment, I'm going to demonstrate this tool called Slido. Check it out if you're not familiar with it. That's at slido.com. And if you use Google Presentations or Google Slides, Slido, it just embeds organically within your presentation, and it provides a nice way for checking for understanding. There's other tools too, like Mentimeter. A lot of teachers use Padlet and other things. All right, so let's talk about using the chat for a moment. When I present, what I like to do is I like to give my students the code of a question mark. And if you have a question, I want you to drop a question mark, or when you begin with a question mark, and then write your question. And that will alert me that there's a question, right? Because like right now, if I look at the chat, there's lots and lots of things there. And when you start this and your students become familiar with it, they're going to use the chat over and over and over again. There's going to be lots of things. You want some kind of code or some kind of system that's going to alert you to where the questions are. And if you teach your students to put in question, colon, and whatever you want the question to be, that will be helpful for you as the facilitator. Also, I encourage you to do pre-created questions, like pre-created questions that you can, like we did at the beginning. And if you wanted the discussion to take place in the chat, you could just cut and paste those pre-created questions in the chat. Then, in addition to that, you can also use the chat to add links. So if you want your students to go out, like I was doing an activity just a couple days ago where I wanted my participants to go and use a Mentimeter poll. And so I just dropped the Mentimeter poll inside the chat, and that's how they got there. All right, some other things you want to check in with the students in the chat, you can use the chat for, is simple questions like just, who is still with me, right? Let me know you're still out there and you're still listening, because again, this is kind of strange, right? I'm talking to my monitor. I know you're all out there, but I'm talking to my monitor, and it's important that we do whatever we can to engage or re-engage our students. So asking questions like, who is still with me, I think is very appropriate. In addition to that, you can do things like, you know, we have the fist of 5, or you can have students put in like 3, 2, 1, like 3 if they really understand something, 2 if they only slightly understand it, and 1 if they really need more help with it. And again, if they drop in that 3, 2, 1 in the chat, that's going to give you a heads up about, it's like a formative check for understanding. It's going to give you a heads up about what the students are getting and what they understand. And then do things like this too, right? In 7 minutes or in 2 minutes, we're going to stop and everyone will enter 1 question or observation in the chat. That's one more thing to keep the students engaged and keep them on their toes. All right, so let's talk about the technical aspect of Google Meet and what's available there. So we're going to go around this. This image, and this is my colleague Jonathan, the one who's helped prepare some of the materials for today. And this is the Google Meet interface. And so at the top, as we work our way around clockwise, the very first thing and the very first icon that you'll see in Google Meet is the people icon, and that's where you manage participants. And this includes inviting people, muting people, and removing people. And so we'll probably talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And right next to that is the chat box. And the chat box is where you open up the chat, and that's where the chat appears. Below that, as we're moving around clockwise, there's more options for record. There's more options in that where those 3 dots are. And that includes where you can record a meeting. In addition to that, we talked about sharing your screen, and I'm going to show another screenshot of that here in a moment. This is where you can share your screen by presenting here. And you can either share a window or you can share a specific tab. And then a very important accessibility feature is the closed captioning that's available within Google Hangouts Meet. So do check that out. I've been really impressed with that. Okay. I'm going to stop here for a moment. I'm going to ask Colleen to come back in and see if there's any questions that we need to address.
Sure, we have quite a few, so we'll pop through these. I know the most recent question that I got was asking if Mentimeter and Slido are AB compliant, protecting student info. That was from Lori. She wanted to know because she said her district is huge on this.
Yeah, and what an important, okay, good. And what an important thing. So Slido, to my understanding, should be, because you don't necessarily capture data. You don't necessarily capture student data. So that we should be good to go with that one. And tell me about the other tool.
Sure. Is it true Google Meet Premium is now free for everyone until September?
Yeah, and I don't know the specific end date for that. So yeah, so for our district, so you might have seen when I opened up mine, we haven't paid for it, and yet we can now invite up to 250 participants. So we have that ability, and that should be true across the board. I do think that the IT team in your district is going to need to add that.
Okay. And then there are a couple that I'm going to kind of lump together. We have some questions about what does it look like when a student moderates the chat, and then if you do allow students to moderate, what are your tips or suggestions for that? And then kind of coupled with that is, what about classroom assistants hosting or co-hosting as well? We have many that completely assist the teacher. So maybe tackle a little bit about the chat and classroom, like how that looks when students moderate.
Yeah, so I'm going to focus on the moderation bit. And I know that this isn't for everybody. And in fact, I have colleagues who just want to do it all themselves. But I know in my practice that every now and then, every semester or so, or every other semester, I'll get a student aide, and that would be the person that I would ask to moderate. And of course, I train that person. Like I said, I think it's not for everybody, but it's another set of eyes and ears, or excuse me, another set of eyes on what's transpiring, I think is helpful for everybody.
All right, I'm going to run through a few more of these.
It's okay, Colleen, just so I can continue. I know we're at 3:30.
Sure, yeah. Correct me if I'm wrong here. There is no raise hand button in Google Meet. That is just a Zoom feature, correct? So
I
that'll
haven't
answer,
seen it yet. Other than this, right? If you have the
right.
kids, if you have the video showing, right?
And when you were talking about thumbs up, you were talking about physically having them show thumbs up, thumbs down, or 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, back to you.
All right, very good. Thanks, everybody. And if you didn't get your question answered, know that there's going to be another opportunity. So if you have a question that you really want to get addressed, look back in the chat or just re-enter it, and hopefully we'll be able to address it at the end. There are a lot of you here, and we want to make sure that we, again, equip and empower everybody to the best extent possible to use this tool. So we stopped off with the recording, or actually we stopped off with the closed captioning. The closed caption tool. And again, check that out. And again, with all this stuff, I encourage you to practice. If you're in a district that's going to use Google Hangouts Meet as your tool for synchronous online meetings, do practice it. Check it out. See how it works. Not too long ago, I opened it. I wasn't sure how the closed captioning tool works. So I opened up and I started a Google Hangouts Meet. I turned on closed captioning and then I saw it work. I was really impressed, actually. The next set of tools over are the presenter controls, and those include mute, end call, and mute video. Do take note of how close the mute audio and the mute video buttons are to the end call. You don't want to press that one inadvertently. And then if you, on the far right, there's some sharing information you can bring up again. So that's the interface. It's pretty, if you can handle the Zoom meeting, I think you're going to have no problem with the Google Hangouts meeting. And again, I encourage you to practice and check it out prior to rolling it out with students. All right, so we're going to stop here. This is going to be another check for understanding, this time using the Slido tool. And I'm going to plan on demonstrating some of these features. What I would like you to respond to is the following. Which features would you like to see demonstrated or modeled? Please go to slido.com and enter in code 7453, and let's see what the audience wants.
Or you can also scan that QR code and it works too, if you have your phone.
Yeah, and you can either drag out a tab or use your phone. That'll work just fine. The code is 7453. I'll drop that in the chat. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I like that it slides too. It's interactive. It's engaging in its own right. If you want to do choose all, choose them all. You can choose multiple if you'd like. All right, so we're seeing managing a meeting. Okay, good. Present my screen. Those look like it looks like we're getting some, the plurality is gathering in those top two. We're gonna leave this open for another, let's say 30 more seconds. Again, Slido is another great, if you're using Google Slides, it's absolutely, I recommend that you check this out and that you incorporate this into your checks for understanding with your students. Really nice. Okay, and let's go for another 10 seconds. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And it seems like there's some clear direction here about presenting your screen and managing a meeting, including muting and removing participants. Very good. So thank you for completing that. And again, as teachers, we all know that we want to stop and check for understanding and poll our students. Also, we know that voice and choice is an integral part of our instructional activities. And tools like Slido certainly allow us to do that. All right, so going from this, we're going to first look at presenting my screen. We'll also take a look at managing a meeting, including muting and removing participants. We'll also look at starting a meeting, and I think we'll get through a fair number of these. All right, so I'm going to go to Google Meet now. So I'm going to go to Google Meet, and the first thing we're going to take a look at is presenting your screen. So in Google Meet, to start a Google Meet, I can go to meet.google.com, but that's one way. Another way, right, that I recommended is to go from Google Calendar. So I'm going to back up, and I'm going to go to Google Calendar. I'm going to go to today or this month, and I'm going to set up a class. And I'll give it a date and a time. So let's do 10 to 11. And I'll come over here and I'll add my students via Google Classroom again. Again, I really like this integration. And I'll add conferencing. And I'll click save. And I can send this, right? So I'm not going to send it now because this is just a practice. It's just a demo, but I can send an email to all the students in my first period US history class. So I'm not going to send that. Now I have this on the 11th. I'm going to click on that. So let's say it's the 11th and I want to start this. I can go to my calendar. I can open that up and I can click Join Hangouts Meet. It's going to ask me to join now. So this is really cool, right? I'm doing a Hangouts Meet inside of a Zoom meeting, which is kind of cool. I'm going to click Join Now, and there it is. I'm off and going. So so that's starting the meeting, right? The other thing that I wanted to cover, or that was asked about, was presenting my screen. And so by clicking Present Now, it's going to pop up a dialog box that asks me what I want to present, and I can either do a window or my entire screen. So I'm going to do a window. That's my typical practice. Like I'll launch in advance of the lesson. I'll put all the windows that I want to use for the lesson, and I'll click on window, and then I'll select the window that I want. Let's say it's this one. And now I'm presenting the window. So that's the nice way to use a screen share, an easy way to use screen share. And you can see here too that there's my people icon for managing the people in the meeting. There's my chat feature and so on. So I'm going to close out of this and let's go back and let's see what else resonated with everybody. So managing a meeting, the classroom management tools, right? So including muting and removing participants. The best way to show you that is via a screenshot. And I figured that was going to be one of the things that came up. So I did take a screenshot in advance. And so I'm going to show you that now. I'm going to toggle to that. So here is the meeting management screen. And what happens is when you click on that people icon, you're going to see a list of all your participants. And you can scroll to the student that you need to manage in this way. And on the far right, you can click that button right there, and that's remove. In the middle, that is mute. And on the far left is where you could actually pin their screen, and you can actually make them the image that, or the video, or the image that's front and center. Google is changing this, how this operates. There's going to be some changes this week, according to my contact at Google. And as it stands right now, I think if you remove a student or you mute a student, they can unmute themselves or they can come back in. And I think they're changing that so that either this week or next week, when you, as a teacher, as the host of the meeting, if you remove a student, they can't come back in. And if you mute a student, they can't unmute themselves. So regardless of what the circumstance is, whether you use it this week or next week, when they make those changes, do use these tools with discretion, right? Because I think just knowing from the experience of teachers in my district right now, just even getting students and getting them back into the fold of teaching and learning We just have to be very aware of how we're using tools like remove and mute. Okay, certainly make your students aware of these things, that you have these abilities. Okay, so let's go back to see what that data showed us about what we wanted to see. Okay, so starting a meeting, we did that. I think I showed recording, but let me cover that again to show you where that's at. This is, if I go back to, again, let's imagine that I'm starting from this class on the 11th, and I start the meeting. I click join now. These three dots, if I click on those, I can click on record meeting, and then I'm recording. What it will do then is Google will be sending you at the end, after your meeting is finished, it will send your recording to you in an email, as well as the chat transcript. And it's very helpful. Okay, so we talked about recording. Okay, thank you for putting this, change audio and video settings. This is going to be really important, especially the video settings. Let's say you have students, or you yourself are having issues with your internet connection, and you want to throttle that down so that the bandwidth that is, like if you're showing 720p, like high resolution video, and you want to make that a little bit less so that you're not using as much bandwidth to increase your internet connection or to increase the speed, here's how you would do that. So again, using those three dots, you can go to settings, and you can go to video. And this is where you can say, well, send resolution. So the video that's being sent from my computer, I can make it 360 or 360p, which is a lot less than 720p. Still pretty good in most cases. You can change that if you want. Like if the connection's good, you can go to 720p. Then the receive resolution, you can also change that to 360p and 720p and a couple of other things. Notice here you can also do audio only. And that's in the case, so you might have students that are in an area that they have poor Wi-Fi, or perhaps they're using a hotspot to connect and there's issues with them. You would want to teach them and show them this. Okay, I can see something coming up in the chat. Can you demo the grid inside of Google Hangout to see all, oh yeah. So right now I'm showing my Google Meet screen. This is the button. Right now I don't have anybody in this meeting, so I can't show you how it works, but I do encourage you to go to that slide where the grid view is linked from and open that up, and then and launch that and see how that works, because it's a really nice feature. Okay, so again, so we talked about changing audio and video settings. We've talked a little bit about the chat, but let me go back and just reinforce that. Here's the chat right here. And you would enter your message. And there you're off and going. Notice, I think very important for teachers, notice that it's also, just like within Zoom, it's giving you there's some accountability, right? There's it's identifying you, but it's also identifying the names of your students. All right, and mute my audio and video are those tools at the very bottom. All right, so we've done a good job. We've covered everything here, and let's see what we have next. We talked about screen sharing. We've talked about meeting management. We've talked about what to do in the case that there's slow internet. I'm going to conclude here, and I think we're going to have some time for questions and answers, but in conclusion, what I want to, again, refer you back to are the helpful resources, again, from my colleague, Jonathan Green. You see some guidelines, the text guidelines for using Google Hangouts Meet. Also that video tutorial, again, about 10 minutes, really nice overview of the features there. Again, be warned that that first 30 seconds or so of audio is a little bit weird, but then it cleans up and gets much better. And then there's some information from Google. I can see a question in the chat about changing background. At this point, you cannot change the background other than you changing it on your own, right? All right, so I'm going to turn things over now back to Colleen, and we're going to go to the moderated question and answer period. Thank you very much, everybody. Really enjoyed this time so far.
All right, we have quite a few, so I'm going to try to crank through as many as I can. If you mute a student and you can't unmute them, but you've addressed that, right? So can you reiterate if? they mute a student, what happens?
So if I mute a student, the student can unmute themselves now. Although I think Google is going to be putting in some changes here. My understanding is they're going to put some changes here in the next, like maybe even this week, where if you mute a student or remove a student, that will be, the student will be gone and they'll be muted. Again, we want to use those tools with discretion, right? We want to use those, be careful with those.
There's a question. It says that it seems that Google Meet has delayed audio video problems and was blurry when they used it. And how do you share your teaching screen?
Yeah, so go back to the settings. So if you go back to, and I'm going to show Google Meet again. So if that's an issue, and you go to the settings and you find that either on your side or your students are reporting this, go to those three dots in the bottom right corner, click on settings, and then go to video. And this is where you can change your video resolution. And that will make a difference. Another thing that will make a difference, if it's really bad, you can have students just call into the meeting, right? So that's another option. So if I go back to my meeting, notice that there's also this number. So students can join by phone.
And that was going to be my next question was, can you invite using any email or does it have to be Google? And there were quite a few asking if, like I know a lot of elementary students have an email set up, but they don't actually physically receive email, or, you know, whether they can join. Does it show up in classroom if you put your students in, or how does that work? What's the best way for inviting students who don't have email?
So to invite students that don't have email. So somehow, I mean, what's nice about it is you can set up one Meet link. Like if your class meets repeatedly at the same time every day or every week, you can set up one link and you can use that link repeatedly. And so it's just somehow you need some way, some mechanism for communicating that link out. So like, here's the link for this meeting. And I can come back to that link and open it up. And as a facilitator, as a host, I can use that repeatedly. And
could you share that in your Google Classroom?
Oh, yes. Yeah. In fact, yeah. So thank you for that. So what I would do, again, in my workflow is I'd set up the meeting in Calendar. I'd copy that link, and then I'd go to Classroom and I'd put an announcement like, here's our meeting link. Yeah, so thank you for that clarification. That's important.
Crystal would like to know how you can have two tabs or screens open like you do.
So, right, so when you open up your browser and you have, let's say you start with one tab. Well, let's do it here. So I'm gonna close out of this. Mm-hmm. And so right now I've got these two tabs, and you probably just lost that one because it's going out. It's hard to demonstrate this now because I'm presenting my screen, but what I can do is I can pull out one tab and I can drag it over. And so you're not seeing that now, but that's what I can do is I can move it to the side.
There have been a couple of questions about some safety issues. People want to know, is Google Meet safer than meeting in Zoom? Is there a waiting room like you can have in Zoom, or a pin? And also some questions about the safety of recording your meetings with students. Yeah,
well, I really appreciate that questions about safety. This is something your district is going to want to adopt some policies around this. And in our district, we're still trying to identify, initially we started off with the idea about recording for those students that don't make it. But right now, the direction I'm hearing from district administrators is don't record. So that we're still navigating that space. We're not quite sure. Colleen, can you remind me of the first part of that question?
What is there? Oh, is there a waiting room or a password like you get in Zoom where before you as the teacher start the meeting, the students aren't in there until you say, come on in? Yeah, so Zoom does have that feature, and that's a nice feature, but I haven't had any meetings in Google Hangouts Meet that have been co-opted, and I think it's because it all occurs where the district I'm in is a G Suite, mm-hmm. Google for Education district, and so everything occurs within the closed confines of that domain that we have with Google. So that hasn't been an issue. Okay,
like what we've seen with Zoom. And so I think it is. I don't know for certain, but my understanding so far is it's a bit safer.
A little safer. Okay. There were a few questions about whether there's a way to take attendance, and also can you add more than one class at a time, or Carolyn asked that, I guess in their Google, they're grouped as a whole class level, so 5th grade all, or is there a way to just invite her 34 without inviting the entire 5th grade from her school?
Well, if she has a Google Classroom set up for just those students, then she can use that where she goes to Google Calendar, and she invites those students that are in her class,
Okay.
in her Google Classroom class.
Mm-hmm. And then is there a way to take attendance?
So that's an interesting point. So we're also working on what is the best way to do attendance. So I think what you could do is you could have people, since the chat is, you can record the chat, right? So you could have people check in, you could have your students check in on the chat. You could also do things like a Google form, right? So you could say, I want you to go to this Google form, maybe drop the link to that in Classroom and just say, I'm here. And maybe it's just a one question, I'm here link, or a one click, I'm here question.
Okay. Is there a way to invite more than one class at a time?
Yeah.
Okay. How would you do that?
So thank you. So again, just yeah, right. So I would go back to my calendar, and so I go back to my calendar, and I have this meeting already set up, this class meeting already set up, this on April 11th, my 10 a.m. period 1 U.S. history, and let's see if I have another GoGuardian or another Google Classroom. So I have a class created for GoGuardian. That's one of my other Google Classrooms. Notice I can drop that in here too. So anybody that's in that GoGuardian Google Classroom, I've just added them to my list here.
Okay. Is there any way to add different icons for students to pop into the chat other than question mark, or is that kind of it for Google Meet? Like there's not like a thumbs up or anything like that?
Yeah. So again, my favorite thumbs up is this one.
Okay.
Right. But I think I've seen people use icons, and if someone could Google that in the chat, that would be great. Because I think I have seen people use that in Google Meet, but I have not myself.
Okay. And then there are a couple of questions about Google Classroom and chat. Is Google Classroom the same as Google Chat as far as features, use, comments, questions? Or I think in this case, they mean Google Meet, not Google Classroom.
Are you referring to Google Hangouts versus Google Hangouts?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Google Hangouts is it's not the full-fledged Meet tool that Google has just availed to schools for free. So we've been able to conduct, if you're a G Suite for Education district, like we are in Salinas, we've been using Google Hangouts Meet not Google Hangouts Meet, Google Hangouts as our chatting tool, as our messaging tool, and also as our video meeting tool. Google Hangouts Meet offers some more functionality, like the recording. I think it also has better resolution and some other features like removing people and muting and those kinds of things. So it's a little bit more. The Google Hangouts Meet tool is a little bit more advanced than the Google Hangouts tool.
And then when you're actually in and you're casting a meeting like we are right now, there have been some questions about whether you can mute the chat or pause the chat so the students are not typing away when you want them to pay attention to you.
Yeah. So that's good. So one of the things I referenced, so I appreciate that, is there's going to need to be some, you're going to have to establish some norms with your students about when do I want you to use the chat and how do I want you to use the chat? What kind of words do I want you to use in the chat? What kind of words do I want you to use if you disagree with somebody, if you agree with somebody, all those kinds of things. And so you're going to want to, I think you're going to want to choreograph that. One way to do that, I mean, you could do this, like, so I'm going into the chat now, and I could just put something like this. So this is where I'm putting something in. This is where I'm telling everybody that we're putting a pause. I'm putting a block. Did you see how that came in just now?
We can't see that screen. We're still on the last slide.
Oh, okay. So let me.
Oh, wait, over in the chat. Sorry.
So I'm going in the chat right now, and I'm putting in a block.
Okay.
So there's the block.
So that's a signal to your students to
It could
not,
be.
yeah.
Perhaps if you feel you need to do that, right?
Yeah. Okay, I think I apologize. We still have like 30 questions. I tried to
Yeah.
get
Okay.
through as many as I could, but we have hit the 4 o'clock hour.
All right.
Rob, thank you so much for being here. Thank you everybody who has attended and who has stuck with us through this. We tried to get to all your questions. We do have another session on Thursday. If you go to our website, leagueofschools.org, and go to the online free PD, you will be able to access that and register for that. Corey Koval will be meeting with us and talking about all things Google Classroom. And as Rob mentioned, next week we do have a PD session that's a little bit more SEL focused about how to navigate this new normal. So thank you to everyone for being here. We will send you links to the slides and a link to the presentation after the fact. You will receive that so you can go back and watch this again. So thank you everyone for being here. And thank you, Rob.
Thank you, everybody. Colleen, I'll follow you by email and
Yes.
regarding the other one. All right.
Perfect.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.